The cold steel of the clippers bit into my scalp, the buzzing of hornets nest in my ear. They were laughing, these three officers, tearing away my hair piece by piece, trying to strip me of my dignity right there on the sidewalk. I felt each braided lock fall, but my face remained a mask of calm. They thought they were breaking just another black woman walking alone at night. But as the last of my crown fell, they had no idea they'd just declared war on a United States general. Before I tell you what happened next, make sure you hit that subscribe button and drop a comment telling us where you're watching from. Now, let me tell you exactly how it all began. It was a quiet Tuesday night in Oak Creek, Georgia. The air in Oak Creek was thick with the scent of honeysuckle and freshly cut grass, a world away from the dust and cordite that had been my perfume for the better part of a decade. After years of commanding troops across deserts and in mountains whose names most Americans couldn't pronounce, I was on leave. My mission, to rediscover the quiet rhythm of civilian life. I walked these tree-lined streets, not as General Eva Rostova, but simply as Eva, a 30-year-old woman trying to reconnect with a home that felt both foreign and familiar. I wore a worn gray hoodie with a faded West Point logo, a relic from a lifetime ago, a silent testament to where my journey began. It was my armor of anonymity. That night, my only objective was a carton of milk from the 24-hour convenience store. The street lights cast long, distorted shadows, and the silence was broken only by the chirp of crickets. It was peaceful, but as a soldier, you learn that peace is often just the moment you take a breath before the chaos begins. I saw them from 50 yards out, a police cruiser parked haphazardly, its lights off, and three figures leaning against it. My training kicked in instantly, a subconscious checklist running through my mind. Threat assessment, 3 hostiles, overconfident posture, poor situational awareness, likely looking for a target of opportunity. I dismissed the thought as paranoia, a ghost of my former life. This wasn't a war zone. This was home. I kept walking, my pace steady. As I drew nearer, they pushed off the car, their movements synchronized with an unearned swagger. The one in the middle, who I'd later learn was Officer Miller, had a cruel smirk playing on his lips. Well, what have we here? He said, his voice dripping with condescension as they moved to block my path. His shadow fell over me, a sudden, chilling eclipse. I stopped, my body perfectly still. I didn't speak. In a hostile negotiation, the first person to speak often loses ground. Cat got your tongue. Another one snickered. Miller stepped closer, invading my personal space. The smell of cheap coffee and power hung in the air around him. Let's see some ID. His tone wasn't a request. It was a command meant to assert dominance. I could have reached into my pocket and produced credentials that would have made his blood run cold. But I didn't. In that moment, I wasn't a general. I was a black woman in Georgia being harassed by 3 white cops. Revealing my rank would have ended the confrontation, but it wouldn't have addressed the root of the problem. This wasn't about me. It was about the woman they thought I was. So I simply met his gaze, my eyes steady and unwavering. My silence was my shield, but to him, it was a challenge. His face tightened, the smirk twisting into a snarl of frustrated authority. You think you're better than us? Think you're above the law? He gestured to his partner. She's refusing to cooperate. Maybe we need to teach her some respect. That's when the third officer produced the clippers. The sound of them buzzing to life sliced through the quiet night. It wasn't standard procedure. It wasn't lawful. It was a weapon of pure humiliation. A visceral act designed to break me. As Miller grabbed my shoulder, my mind didn't flash with fear. It flashed back to a dusty outpost in Kandahar, my hand steady as I stitched up a young private's wound under fire. I remembered the weight of responsibility, the calm you must find in the heart of the storm. That calm was my fortress now. He held me while his partner brought the buzzing clippers to my head. I had spent hours having my hair braided into intricate cornrows, a crown of cultural pride and personal identity. And with a single, vicious pass, they began to destroy it. I felt the cold metal scrape against my scalp, heard the brutal shearing sound as lock after lock of my hair fell to the pavement. They were laughing, but I did not flinch. I did not cry out. I just watched them, my silence a mirror reflecting their own ugliness back at them. They thought they were winning. In reality, they had just handed me all the ammunition I would ever need. I walked away from them without a word, my scalp tingling and exposed, the fallen pieces of my hair like casualties on the sidewalk behind me. I didn't go back to my parents' house. Instead, I drove to a small, impersonal hotel on the edge of town. I needed a sterile environment, a command center to plan my next move. Sleep was a luxury I couldn't afford. The first call I made was to a lawyer, a man I'd served with who now fought his battles in a courtroom. The second was to a contact at the Pentagon, not to pull rank, but to give them a quiet heads up. An incident occurred involving a general officer on leave. I stated, my voice devoid of emotion. It will likely become a public matter. By dawn, his prediction was an understatement. The video, filmed by a teenager from a nearby apartment window, had exploded. My face, or rather the back of my head, was everywhere. The grainy footage of 3 officers holding me down while one shaved my hair was a viral firestorm. The hashtags were already trending. Hashtag Justice for Jane Doe, hashtag Oak Creek PD, hashtag Her Crown. It was a surreal out-of-body experience to watch my own violation replayed on a loop on my phone screen, commented on, and shared by millions. They didn't know who I was. To the world, I was an anonymous symbol of injustice. Another face in a long, tragic gallery. A part of me, the soldier trained for covert operations, wanted to remain anonymous. My career was built in the quiet corridors of power and on battlefields far from the public eye. Stepping into the spotlight felt like a tactical error, exposing my position to the enemy. But another part of me, the woman, the leader, knew this was a fight I couldn't direct from the shadows. This wasn't about one soldier's pride. It was about the fundamental principles I had sworn an oath to defend. I stood before the hotel mirror and truly saw the damage for the first time. My head was a mess of uneven patches and bare skin where the clippers had been cruelest. The intricate pattern of my cornrows was gone, replaced by a battlefield of jagged lines. I ran my hand over my scalp. It didn't feel like a wound. It felt like a declaration. This was their mark on me, an attempt to brand me as powerless. But looking into my own eyes, I didn't see a victim. I saw a warrior who had just been handed a new uniform. This shaved head, half scar, half crown, would be my standard in the war to come. Later that day, my lawyer called. "You won't believe this, Eva," he said, his voice tight with anger. They released a statement. Officer Miller and the others are on paid administrative leave, pending an internal investigation. Miller's union rep told the press they were responding to a report of a suspicious individual, and that their actions were a non-standard but effective de-escalation technique. De-escalation. The word was so grotesquely clinical, so far removed from the violent reality of the act. They weren't sorry. They were arrogant. A local news station caught Miller leaving the precinct, and he smirked at the camera, telling the reporter, "People are just overreacting. We were just doing our jobs." That smirk, it was the same one I'd seen under the streetlights. That was the moment my internal conflict ceased. My decision was no longer a choice. It was a duty. They had underestimated their target. Now, they were about to learn the true meaning of engagement. The months leading up to the trial were a masterclass in strategic patience. We filed a federal lawsuit, and the Department of Justice launched its own investigation. The city of Oak Creek was a tinderbox of protests and press conferences. Through it all, I remained silent. My legal team handled the statements. I stayed out of sight, preparing. I knew this battle would be won or lost, not in the court of public opinion, but on the witness stand. The courtroom itself felt like a pressure cooker on the first day. The air was thick with a mixture of stale coffee, perfume, and palpable tension. It was packed to the rafters with journalists, activists, and curious locals. When Officer Miller and his 2 partners, Riley and Jensen, walked in, they were flanked by lawyers, their faces set in masks of practiced indifference. Miller still had that flicker of arrogance in his eyes. He scanned the room, a king surveying a kingdom he believed still belonged to him. I sat in the front row, a civilian in a simple black dress, my hair now grown into a short, uniform buzz cut. I wanted them to see me. I wanted them to look at what they had done. For weeks, I listened as the prosecution laid out its case. They played the shaky cell phone video, and a collective gasp filled the room. Witnesses testified. The teenager who filmed it, a shopkeeper who saw the whole thing from his window. The defense team was relentless, trying to paint me as an uncooperative, aggressive suspect. They questioned my reasons for being out so late, the provocative nature of my silence. With every question, they were digging their own graves deeper. Finally, the day came. The prosecutor called out, "The people call Eva Rostova to the stand." A hush fell over the courtroom. I stood and walked toward the witness stand, each step deliberate and measured. I could feel every eye on me. Miller watched me, a faint, condescending smile on his lips, as if he were about to watch a final, pathetic performance. I placed my hand on the Bible and swore the oath. The prosecutor began, "Please state your full name for the record." I looked directly at the jury, my voice clear and steady, filling the silent room. "Eva Rostova. And what is your current occupation, Ms. Rostova?" I turned my head slightly, my gaze sweeping past the defense table until it landed squarely on Officer Miller. I saw the moment his smirk began to falter, the confusion clouding his eyes. I let the silence hang in the air for a beat, holding the entire room in a state of suspended animation. Then, I delivered the payload. "I am a general in the United States Army." The words detonated in the quiet courtroom. A wave of shock rippled through the gallery. Gasps, murmurs, reporters frantically scribbling in their notepads. The judge's gavel tapped weakly as he tried to restore order. But the real impact was at the defense table. Officer Miller's face went completely white. The arrogance drained away, replaced by a dawning, sickening horror. The blood left his face, and his jaw hung slack. He looked at me, truly looked at me for the first time, and I could see the gears turning in his head. The West Point hoodie, my unyielding posture, my refusal to be intimidated. It all clicked into place. The woman he had mocked, assaulted, and humiliated was not just a citizen. She was a commander, a leader of soldiers, a woman who held a rank and a level of authority he could not possibly comprehend. For the rest of my testimony, he couldn't meet my eyes. He was no longer a predator. He was prey, and he knew it. My testimony itself wasn't emotional. I recounted the events with the cold, factual precision of an after-action report. I didn't need tears. The truth was my weapon, and it had already hit its target. Verdict day felt different. The tension outside the courthouse had transformed from anger into a kind of sacred anticipation. The streets were flooded with people, a sea of faces holding signs and waiting for a resolution that felt bigger than just my case. Inside, the air was electric. As I prepared that morning, I made a deliberate choice. I didn't put on another simple dress. I went to my closet and took out my full, decorated Class A uniform. The dark blue jacket, the perfectly creased trousers, the polished shoes. It felt heavier than usual. Each piece of metal and ribbon pinned to my chest was a story, a promise, a life. The Silver Star, for leading a rescue mission under heavy fire. The Purple Heart, a piece of shrapnel from a Kandahar ambush still lodged deep in my shoulder. This wasn't a costume. It was my skin. It was the physical manifestation of my oath. When I walked into the courtroom, the silence was absolute. It was as if the entire room collectively held its breath. The flash of cameras was momentarily stunned. I walked past the defense table, and this time, I saw raw fear in the eyes of Miller, Riley, and Jensen. They saw the uniform. They saw the rows of ribbons. They saw the single silver star on my shoulder. They finally understood the gravity of who they had challenged. I took my seat, my back ramrod straight, my gaze fixed on the judge's bench. The jury filed in, their faces solemn, unreadable. They took their seats, and the foreman handed a slip of paper to the bailiff. The judge read the verdict, his voice resonating with the weight of the moment. On the charge of conspiracy to violate civil rights, guilty. On the charge of assault under color of law, guilty. On the charge of deprivation of rights, guilty. Each word was a hammer blow, dismantling their careers, their authority, their entire world. A wave of emotion washed over the gallery. Sobs of relief, cheers muffled by hands. Outside, we could hear the roar of the crowd as the news broke. The officers sat there, utterly broken, their heads bowed in disgrace as the marshals moved in to place them in cuffs. But my moment of victory wasn't watching them being led away. As the judge adjourned the court, I stood up. I turned, not to the crowd, but to the American flag hanging, worn and dignified, beside the judge's bench. I raised my hand to my brow in a slow, deliberate salute. It was not a gesture of blind patriotism. It was a reaffirmation, a message to everyone watching that the ideals that flag represents, justice, equality, and the rule of law, are not guaranteed. They must be fought for, defended, and demanded as fiercely on the streets of Oak Creek as on any foreign battlefield. When I finally walked out of the courthouse onto the sun-drenched steps, the crowd parted for me. The noise was deafening, but it was a sound of joy, of vindication. An old man in a veteran's cap saluted me, his eyes filled with tears. A young mother pointed me out to her daughter, whispering my name like a prayer. I had been stripped of my hair, my anonymity, my peace. But in its place, I had found a new purpose. I had transformed my deepest humiliation into a weapon of change and a symbol of hope. I hadn't just won a case. We had reclaimed a piece of our nation's soul. That day, I truly understood that dignity is not something that grows on your head or is stitched onto a uniform. It is forged in the core of your spirit, and no one can take it from you unless you allow them to. That painful experience taught me that the fight for justice at home is just as critical and often more complex than any war fought overseas. My battlefield simply changed from the deserts of the world to the courtroom of my own country. Have you ever been judged or underestimated based on how you look? What would you have done in my shoes? Would you have revealed your identity right away, or waited for a moment with more impact like I did? Do you think true strength is shown in the heat of confrontation, or in the quiet resilience of enduring until the right moment to strike? I want to know what you think. If my story touched you and reminded you of the power of inner strength, please hit that like button and subscribe for more real stories like this. Share this video with someone who needs to be reminded not to judge a book by its cover. I promise you, I read every single comment you leave. More incredible true stories from my life are waiting on your screen. Watch those next, and I'll see you tomorrow with another story that changed everything for me.